Welcome to Tour Today Ministries. My name is Grant Luton.
And this is Robin.
And we're here for another episode of our series called Breadcrumbs, where we just share with you things that Robin and I talk about during the week.
Yeah, and even the whole idea of bread, our last few episodes, we discussed how this is about that.
Yes.
And how even bread itself is such
right.
a picture of something so eternal. You know, we're told that we don't live by bread alone,
but by
every word
that
proceeds from his mouth.
That's right.
And here we are, Grant, in this season, and we both know, and our listeners know, that our Mashiach, our Messiah, didn't actually come and be born in Bethlehem on, the date that much of the world
December
celebrates.
25th,
but
right.
You know what? His incarnation is something to ponder.
Yeah.
And here he is, the bread of life, born in a town called Bethlehem, or the house of bread. And placed in a feed trough.
Born in a feed trough. Yeah.
So there in itself,
There's a picture.
There's quite a picture.
Well, we're not going to talk about bread in this episode. We're going to talk about storms at sea. And maybe if we had a title for this, maybe call it Surviving the Storm. Mm-hmm. Because you and I, it seems like every day some current event occurs that just is like another wave that slaps the boat and wants to overturn the boat. Mm-hmm. And the culture that seemed to be somewhat stable growing up seems to be in utter upheaval now.
I know, it feels like we're bailing water half the time.
So as we've been talking about that, we visited the subject of storms in the Bible, because in the scriptures, the seas are a picture always of life here in this world, with the uncertainty, with the instability, with the sudden changes from calm to stormy or stormy to calm. And it's interesting that in the Bible, when you start the Bible, the first two verses, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was or became formless and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. The whole world was covered with water.
Wow.
And then on the second day of creation, we see God causing the waters to emerge, or the dry land to emerge out of the waters. Mm-hmm. So we see in the beginning of this chaos, this tohu and vohu, this empty, dark place of the world, is all covered with water. But when you go to the other end of the Bible, to Revelation 21, verse 1, we read, "And I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea." So we've gone to the other extreme. Now there's water and rivers and lakes, as we'll see as you read.
So we're living in this in-between world.
We live in this in-between world. So from the 6 days where God restored his creation until the new earth comes, we live in a world that is storm-tossed, with periods of peace and calm, but we look at the world today, it's not peaceful and it's not calm. It's just crazy out there right now.
Well, we were sitting around the other night, and somehow we got talking about boats, and how the actual Hebrew word for boat is the same word that means I.
Not I as we see, but I as in me.
Yeah.
Yeah, the word for I, for me, myself, is the word ani, Aleph, Nun, Yud. And several places in the scriptures, Isaiah 33:21, 1 Kings 9:26 and 27, and other places, the word for ship or boat is also the exact same word, Aleph, Nun, Yud, ani. Most of the time, the word for ship or boat is aniyah, Aleph, Nun, Yud, with a hey on the end, but still basically the same word. So there's something important going on here. It's like God is trying to tell us, each of you in this world, if you want to survive it, you're in a boat. What is that boat? It's me. It's my body, my soul here in this world.
Right.
And what's interesting is every time we see Yeshua get into a boat, it's a picture of Yeshua entering an individual to accomplish something.
Well, I love the story in Matthew 8 where Yeshua and his disciples are in a boat, and they have left behind some cares of life to follow him. But before long, there is a great storm on the sea, and the boat is being sloshed about with waves, and they start to lose their enthusiasm and peace.
That's for sure.
In their decision to be part of his posse.
Yeah.
And they're freaking out a little, and they go to him and they see him asleep.
Yeah. He's asleep in the boat.
He's asleep in the boat. And I think that the passage indicates that they're a little frustrated, that he could appear unconcerned about the situation, because this is a bad situation, and so they need to wake him up and inform him about how he needs to be concerned like they're concerned. What a picture of me. Talk about ani. I mean, that is a big I.
That's right
there.
And in Mark's account of this, in chapter 4, verse 38, they go to Yeshua and say, they wake him up, don't you care?
Right.
Don't you care
so
that we're
don't we
perishing?
do that? So much of when we call prayer, you know, what we call prayer is us going before him out of just utter frustration, saying, don't you even see what's happening? Don't you care? I'm in the middle of a storm here.
Yeah.
And so in 25 of Matthew 8, he says, well, they say, save us because we're dying here. And then he says, why
are you afraid?
Afraid. Why are you afraid? Men of little faith. And then he calmly gets up.
I picture him rubbing his eyes, yawning, looking out the storm. And then he says, peace be still.
And they can't believe it. They're like, what?
Yeah.
How is it that even the wind and the waves are subject to what you say?
Yeah.
So obviously they're not quite informed in their souls about who he really is.
Well, their faith was still weak.
And divided.
They had enough faith to wake him up and ask him to do something about it. But when I read this story, what it reminds me of is that I have Yeshua in my boat. And sometimes it doesn't seem like he's very active in my boat.
No.
It's like he's just dozing there, unconcerned with all of these worries I have.
Yeah.
My life is going through turmoil, and he doesn't seem to care.
And there's a crowd too. I mean, this was not just one man in this boat. This was a group of them.
Yes.
And together they were all feeding each other's panic.
Yeah.
And together they all thought, he needs to wake up and be aware of what's going on here.
But it seems like the lesson Yeshua wants to teach them through this is that until I get worried, you don't have to worry. Yeah. If I'm resting and asleep in the bottom of the boat, it's not because I don't care. It's because it's handled. I'm in charge.
Right.
It's going to be fine.
Because even the elements in this world are subject to him.
Exactly. And so here we are, and I'm sure that most of our listeners right now could share, if they could speak right now, they could share some upheaval in their life they're going through right at this moment.
Right.
And Yeshua just seems to be asleep in the boat.
Yeah.
So
you're waiting for that job to come through. But Yeshua's in the boat.
Yeah.
And he's at rest.
Or you're worried about a child who's caught up in sin, or there's an illness in your family, a financial difficulty, whatever it is. Look, you don't have to get worried till Yeshua's worried, and he's not worried. So don't be of little faith, but realize this. If the disciples could have known ahead of time exactly what Yeshua would do, they'd have been laughing at the storm.
Right.
They'd have been like the woman of valor who laughs at the future. They're going to think, oh, this is going to be so cool to write this story, because when Yeshua wakes up, he's going to speak a word and calm it all down. Oh, so let's just keep, how long will it be? And they're excited instead of fearful. Yeshua always comes through. He always does. So
well, there's another story.
even when he seems inactive,
right.
we need to trust him.
Right.
Yeah, the next story is
It's
in Matthew 14.
Matthew 14, right.
Now, this is even more troubling.
Yes.
This is a greater test.
Yes.
So, this is in Matthew 14, starting in verse 22.
Well,
Yeah.
before this account, they had just experienced him
Right.
taking a few loaves of bread and a few fish.
Yes.
And it didn't seem to be adequate, but he was very clearly demonstrating to them, listen, when my blessing is involved, and I'm involved, and I'm always involved, it's always more than enough. And so they had just experienced him feeding the multitudes, and then he had them get into a boat, and he sent them out into the
By
lake.
themselves.
Right. And he knew
Yeah,
what was going to happen.
that's right.
But he sent them out there because it was time for them to have this
This is time for the next test.
for this experience.
So this time they are in the boat. There's a storm, but Yeshua's not asleep in the boat. He's not in the boat at all.
He's nowhere, it seems.
And now they're in a real panic.
Right.
Because Yeshua, he's not just inactive in my life. It's like I can't see him in my life at all. He is missing in action.
Mm-hmm.
And then
And I did my best to do what he said.
Yeah,
I'm trying to follow him here.
I do what he tells me to do,
And
and
look.
then he just abandons me.
And here we are in the middle of this lake, in the middle of this storm, and where is he now?
Yeah, but Yeshua was watching. He knew everything was going on, and even in this, he is in charge. So here's what happens. Matthew 14, verse 22, he sends the crowds away. He has the disciples get into a boat and go ahead of him to the other side. And then it says that in verse 24, but the boat was already a long distance from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was contrary. And in the fourth watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. Right when it got to the point where it seemed like it's just too late, there's no hope.
It was dark, too.
He comes walking on the sea. Now let's think about that for a second. We never see this anywhere before. We see the waters parted a number of times in the Bible. The Red Sea, Moses leads them across on dry land.
Jordan.
The Jordan, 40 years later when they come into Canaan. We see Elisha take Elijah's cloak and strike the water, and they cross on dry land. He crosses over. But walking on the water? See, we're used to hoping in God to calm the storm so that we can have peace. But Yeshua's trying to teach them, even if I don't calm the storm, still have peace.
Because I'm above it.
Because I can walk on this water like it's solid ground.
Because it doesn't make a difference.
I'm even greater than the storm, greater than the culture, greater than all the nonsense going out there.
Because I'm truth, and truth doesn't change.
I don't change.
Right.
And
Boy,
I'm at
it's
peace.
so hard to remember that.
Oh.
But he knows how hard it is to remember that.
Yeah.
And he knows that in this in-between world for us, we need these stories,
Yes.
and we need everything he's given us in his word
Right.
to get us through and to teach us this. So none of us have this 100%.
Yeah.
We're in the process of getting this,
Yeah.
hopefully.
So when they see this, what they think is a ghost, it says in verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said it is a ghost. Because after all, people are solid. They don't walk on the water. But ghosts are spirits. They can kind of hover around. I mean,
That seemed to be the logical explanation.
of course.
Right.
And they cried out in fear. I mean, not only are they afraid of the storm and drowning, now they're afraid of being haunted, you know? I mean, how much worse can it get, right? But immediately Yeshua spoke to them saying, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. Then Peter does something that is shocking, but I admire him for this. You know, we often want to kind of knock Peter for putting his foot in his mouth.
He seems so impetuous.
But he does something that's like, go, man, this is awesome. He says, Master, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. And he said, come. Peter got out of the boat. Now think about that for a moment. The boat is ani, it's me. And he's saying, Peter, get out of yourself.
Get outside of...
Get outside of yourself.
Wow.
Get outside of everything that you've taken for granted and you think is normal. Get outside of that and walk on the water. And he did.
Because the truth is so much bigger than what you're experiencing inside your own skin.
Yeah. So Yeshua's speech, Yeshua's word was greater than the laws of nature. It was greater than their fear of ghosts, greater than the storm, greater than drowning, greater than the boat itself, greater than me, myself.
Wow.
And God's saying, get outside yourself and come to me.
And it went well for a moment with Peter because he was able to just see Messiah.
Yeah.
He just saw the Lord.
Yeah.
And his eyes and his heart and his soul were just united, and there wasn't any doubt.
Right.
But then
He had to look at the storm.
well, in verse 30 he says, it says, but seeing the wind.
Seeing the wind.
And the wind isn't even something you can see.
No.
It's something you feel.
He saw the effects of the wind
Yes.
on the waves.
And he became afraid.
Suddenly he reminded himself of the laws of nature
Right.
and saw the laws of nature as being more real than the Word of God. And then he sunk. But even then, even this little failure in his faith, God's still in control. So he walked on the water, came to Jesus, came to Yeshua, but seeing the wind, he became frightened, beginning to sink. He cried out, Master, save me.
So
Immediately,
he
Yeshua stretched out his hand.
He knew who to call.
He knew who to call, and Yeshua saved him. But what does he say? You of little faith. Same thing he said back in chapter 8 when he was asleep in the boat. You have little faith.
And he wasn't doing it to criticize. He was doing it to reveal to them the thing that still needed work.
Yeah. So here we are. Again, going back to our culture, everything just seems to be just going as fast, pedal to the metal, as fast as they can, flying into a cliff. The whole culture seems like it's on a self-destruction course.
And it's really almost impossible, humanly, it is impossible not to be distracted by the waves and the wind and the dark clouds.
Yeah.
It just feels overwhelming.
Well, I want to look at two passages in Revelation that I find very interesting, especially when we lay them side by side and look at them in light of our conversation. And the first passage is in Revelation 13, verse 1. And there's some different ways to translate the first verse. So the dragon stood on the sand of the sea, or he stood on the sea, or I stood on... But anyways, someone's standing on the seashore and says, Then I saw a beast coming up out of the sea, having 10 horns, 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 diadems, and so on. And these blasphemous names. So John, he witnesses this beast, this Antichrist beast thingy. And where does it come?
Out of the culture.
Out of the culture, up out of the stormy waves. Our culture is full of stormy waves right now.
He saw the culmination of everything that we're seeing little bits and pieces of.
And everybody in the world is crying out for a savior to help. And then we'd be happy to send one, a fake savior. So we see this world in a storm, and the Antichrist, the enemy of Messiah, rising out of this turmoil that we're in. But when you go over to chapter 20, let's see, just go back to chapter 4. There are a couple places. We can go ahead to 15 or back to 4. It describes the same scene. But in Revelation 4, verse 6, it describes God's throne room in the heavenlies. And it says, and before the throne there was something like a sea of glass, like crystal. Now, it doesn't mean that the sea was made out of glass. It was water. But it looked like glass because there wasn't a single ripple. It's utter peace. So think about that. While it's a storm down here, there's not a ripple up there. So what do we do? How do we get peace in this world? We go to God's throne room. We're seated with Messiah in heavenly places. So what we have to do, We have to step away from this world, be still, be quiet, be alone, and focus on what the truth is. What has God spoken? Is he in control or not? Is Messiah with us or not? Does he save us or not? Is he greater than the storm or not? We have to remind ourselves of who God is.
Grant, I've been reading a book by Manus Friedman, one of our favorite current teachers, and he said something that I have really found helpful and fascinating. He talks about how there's a difference between facts and truth.
Yes.
And he says, facts, that's life as it seems to be or happens to be, as we're experiencing it.
Yeah.
Whereas truth is reality as it is truly or supposed to be. So everything that happens to us, it seems like we have facts that give us cause to panic or to doubt, but we have to remain conscious of the truth.
Yeah.
Because that's eternal.
Yes.
And it
absolutely.
doesn't change. And sure, we're in this divided world where our souls are divided.
Yeah.
And that's what doubt is, isn't
Yes.
it? It's when our hearts are divided.
Right.
But God calls us to be wholehearted.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not possible for us to be entirely wholehearted until Messiah comes and he puts an end to this division between the truth and the facts as they seem to be.
Facts can be very deceptive.
Yeah.
And facts are like, they kind of float on truth, but they're not the truth. I just read a quote just this morning, and I didn't know you were going to say this. It's by Mark Twain, of course. He says, to start with, get your facts straight. Then you can distort them as you please.
Exactly. Well,
and that's what happens. My dad, from a little kid, he'd always say, he said, figures don't lie, but liars can figure.
Yeah.
In other words, they can manipulate facts to present a falsehood. But truth is the truth is the truth. That doesn't change. While we're talking about the storm here and the stillness in God's throne room and his presence, just total calm. We were looking at this earlier. I was thinking about Jonah.
Yeah.
He was asleep on a boat.
I mean, first we have Jesus asleep in the boat, and then we have him walking on the water, and then we have this guy that we can think about in Jonah.
Yes.
He's completely pitched out of the boat, and he sinks down.
Well, I always have to laugh because when I read either Jonah or the story of Yeshua asleep in the boat, I mean, they come side by side. Here you got the solution to the problem, asleep in the boat. With Jonah, the rebel, they had to throw him overboard for there to be peace.
Yeah.
With Yeshua, they had to wake him up for there to be peace. We all, in our boats, in our souls, we've got a Jonah and we have Yeshua. Be careful which one you throw overboard.
Yeah, sometimes we pitch the wrong one overboard, don't we?
Yes. But Jonah, he's thrown overboard, and then suddenly there's peace, but Jonah is swallowed up by this big fish.
And even that isn't the end of the story.
Even then, God's still in control.
Because the fact is, it's over, a fish swallowed him, but the truth is that Adonai has a plan.
Well, so there's this storm, and they've thrown all the cargo over. They're all scared for their lives. How could it get worse? Well, here's how it gets worse. You get thrown overboard. And you think, oh, here I'm going to drown. How could it get worse? I'll tell you it gets worse. You get swallowed by a big fish.
Life feels that way sometimes.
And yet God's in control. So out of the belly of the fish comes one of the most powerful prayers ever. It's short, it's powerful. Here's the prayer Jonah prayed. It's in Jonah 2, verse 2. I called out of my distress to Adonai, and he answered me. I cried for help from the depth of Sheol. You heard my voice. For you had cast me into the deep. See that? You cast me into the deep. Not the sailors, not me, not circumstances. You were in control.
That's the truth.
That's the truth. The facts are they threw me overboard.
Right.
The truth is you cast me overboard.
Isn't that amazing?
Into the heart of the seas, and the current engulfed me. All your breakers and billows passed over me. So I said, I have been expelled from your sight. That's what Jonah thought. Nevertheless, I will look again toward your holy temple. So from the belly of the fish,
he sees the sea of glass.
he's looking into the throne room, the sea of glass. Water encompassed me to the point of death. The great deep engulfed me. Weeds were wrapped around my head. I descended to the roots of the mountains. The earth with its bars was around me forever. But you have brought up my life from the pit, Adonai my God. While I was fainting away, I remembered Adonai, and my prayer, here from the belly of the fish, came to you into your holy temple. Think about that. You talk about a long-distance phone call. The belly of the fish, right at God's throne room, and God heard him. I mean,
but really,
incredible prayer.
But really, is it long distance? Really?
Not at all, because he's everywhere.
Because
even if I make my bed in hell,
right.
Lord, you are there.
So I guess the moral of our story today is you might be at a place in life where you have seaweed between your teeth, and it feels like the belly of the fish. Storm is winning out. But go into that place.
Yes.
In his presence where the sea is
That's
like
right.
glass, and he is not panicked.
He's in charge.
Messiah is resting in the boat, even though the boat seems like it's in the middle of a storm.
That's right.
It's amazing.
It is. It's a wonderful theme that runs through scriptures.
Well, I hope other people find it as interesting as we did, as we've been
you know, there's one other
it.
little story, and it's in several of the Gospels. I think it's around Matthew 14, but it's also in the others, where Yeshua is on the seashore and he wants to address the crowds around him.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
And he gets in a boat.
And he wants to address them, but when you're in the middle of the crowd, it's hard to be heard by the whole crowd. You can only be heard by the ones right around you. So what does he do? He gets into a boat and says, push off a little ways from the shore. And then from that boat, he could teach the entire crowd. And that to me has always been a picture. I'm the boat. And God says, I want to come into your life. But for me to speak through you, you've got to push off a little bit from the crowd. You have to put a little distance between you and the world. You don't want to be isolated because I can't speak to the world if you're isolated. You can't be right in the middle of the crowd. I can't talk to them that way either. But push off a little ways. And from your boat, the boat of who you are, I can address the majority of people.
Wow, that could be a whole other conversation.
Maybe we should talk about that next time.
That's amazing. Yeah, let's talk about that next time.
All right.
Because what is the proper distance?
See, folks, we're making this up as we go.
They know that already. So the proper distance, that's a great question. And let's all think about that. What is too close to the crowd and what's
too far
from the crowd in order for the message to be heard? That's a great question.
Okay, write that down so we remember to do that.
All right. It's just been a delight for us anyway.
Yeah, and before we go, I just want to let you know that this episode of Breadcrumbs is the 200th teaching.
Wow.
That we've done Robin and I have done some, I've done others, some are interviews, but this makes the 200th recording for Torah Today Ministries. Number 200 right here.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, not quite a year and a half old and 200.
I know, I remember the very first teaching felt so daunting.
Oh yeah.
It's like where do we go, where do we take this? But I think
it's flown by.
He's carrying us through. It's been really a great adventure.
And thank you to everyone who's listening, who helps support this ministry. Thank you for your prayers above all else. And thanks for listening. And we just really appreciate you.
And happy Hanukkah.
Happy Hanukkah. So with that, we wish you shalom and God bless.
Shalom.
Thank you for joining us for today's teaching. If the work of Torah Today Ministries has touched your life, please consider making a donation or sponsoring an upcoming video. As a video sponsor, you'll have an exclusive opportunity to memorialize a family member, celebrate a special event, or simply support the ongoing creation of similar content. Your tax-deductible contribution helps ensure that our teachings continue to reach all who are longing for truth. Click the link or visit our website to learn more.